Denise Roche.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to take the first call on the State Services and Public Finance Bill for the Greens. This is a complex piece of legislation, and I do acknowledge that this bill makes changes to legislation that has been in place for about 25 years. And before I get into the detail of the bill, I'd like to thank the many submitters, and there were many, and particularly the members of the Public Service Association who came and submitted on this bill, who came and provided a face to the committee, the face of those people who will be affected by the changes in this bill. It helped to clarify some of the significant parts of the legislation. And I also just want to acknowledge that to those submitters that their actions were very brave, because it's quite difficult to front up to a select committee of politicians when you work in the sector that's governed by those politicians. And too often the people in the community actually sort of think about public servants as faceless, cardi-wearing bureaucrats or clerical staff. And it couldn't be more far from the truth. Public services, and consequently the implementation of the government's policies, stand or fall on the skills and efforts of public servants. And there are over 44,000 individuals. Sorry. Just keep going. So there's 44,000 individuals who are working in the public service today. They work in Crown entities, they work in departments and ministries, and they're frequently specialists in their fields. They're in hot demand, and they're the public service. They're constantly facing the challenge of recruiting and keeping them in the public service. There's some parts of the bill that we think are very good. We certainly agree with providing more joined-up thinking and the ability to get departments and agencies to work together. And to some extent that is happening now more and more. I think particularly of the gateway services, which combine wraparound services and assessments for young people based on their health needs, their education needs and their social development needs. Three different departments working together for the benefit of their clients. And there's no doubt that reducing the silo mentality of departments is a good way to promote better public services. The term better public services has been bandied around a lot, actually, co-opted by the government to mean anything from budget restrictions to the discontinuation of services and the removal of state housing. And while we can agree that we all do want better public services, we don't really agree with the method that this government is trialling here, or the twisting of the term. There's little doubt that the State Services Act particularly does need to be overhauled. And I recently attended a public meeting with the Honourable Sir Geoffrey Palmer and Stan Rogers. And Stan Rogers talked about the original intention of the State Sector Act, and Sir Geoffrey on the impact of the State Sector Act in shaping the way our public services have worked. And I acknowledge that there were other people, other members in this room who attended that meeting. Sir Geoffrey's points in particular highlighted a lot of the problems that we do see in the public service today. And he included the cult of management as a problem, the loss of institutional memory, which is tied to talented staff migrating to the public sector and lack of rewards for top staff. The lack of training and professional development for staff. He talked about quality issues. He talked about the Crown's legal risk being not adequately protected and suggested that Crown law often came in too late on legislation and issues. He talked about the fact that some public servants were no longer providing free and frank advice, and he referred specifically to ministers' offices. Despite this quite damning criticism, Sir Geoffrey also described this current bill, the one we're talking about today, as a dog's breakfast. His advice for ensuring better public services in New Zealand was to stop this tinkering and have a Royal Commission of Inquiry into how the public service could be improved. Now, the week before last, I was also present at the Government Administration Select Committee during the discussion on the vote with the Minister of State Services, Jonathan Coleman, and the State Services Commissioner, Ian Rennie, and I were present and were answering questions. Some good questions too. And I agree with the Commissioner's view that there does need to be the ability to deploy good people across the organisations and to utilise the best of them. But we believe that this bill, as it's currently written, even with the amendments and the good work that's gone into it as it comes to the House, will hinder that. The purpose statement proposed by the Act includes promoting and upholding a state sector that is, and I quote, supported by effective workforce and personnel arrangements. And there are amendments to introduce obligations of stewardship of the system, and yet the bill actually removes the one provision in the current Act that gives public service chief executives the ability to actively manage skills and capability across the system. It removes the power to transfer employees between agencies and to do the deployment work at the beginning of a process rather than at the end. It replaces this with a seemingly simple restriction on public servants' right to redundancy compensation, which doesn't have the same effect. We note that the bill takes a more sensible approach with public service chief executives. They get far more opportunity to be deployed, and they have that in the bill. Notwithstanding the softening of some of the clauses from the original bill, we believe that as it is now, it will have a significant effect on public servants' conditions of employment. It will remove some entitlements that have been freely contracted for 25 years of the life of the original Act. To a large extent, the provisions around redundancy, technical redundancy and transferal of functions and people seems to ignore the fact that public service employees are not employed by the Crown. They're not employed by just one agency. They're employed in many different agencies, and yet they're treated like that. As has been the case throughout the 25 years since its passing, the Act gives public servants none of the benefits that would come from working for a single public service provider. There's no redeployment process. Redundant public servants find work solely through their own efforts, and this bill seeks to let the government both have its cake and eat it too, by withholding those same benefits and at the same time extract what could be a cost of working for a single employer, a restriction on access to redundancy compensation. And I know that the Labor Party members on the Select Committee worked very hard on this, and it has been softened, but there are still major changes to the working conditions that public servants have currently. On balance, we believe that this bill leaves workers worse off. I'll be introducing a supplementary order paper, which I hope will be supported, about reintroducing relocation protections, but in the meantime we won't be supporting this bill. We're not convinced that the changes in the bill, in any parts of it, the Public Finance Bill or the Crown Entities Bill, actually deliver better public services. And I don't think that the process used to get the bill into its current state was either terribly transparent or democratic. And I would welcome the opportunity to have a bigger discussion about that. And that's why I would support what Sir Geoffrey Palmer says, which is an inquiry which looks at the entire public service and stops tinkering with it, because otherwise we will, as he says, be left with a dog's breakfast.
John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.